Yeah, let's dive into it. And if you're new to our channel, when we do our podcast on Critical Role episodes, the first thing we do is we give a recap of each episode just because they're so long. We like to get everyone refreshed on the details before we dive into our actual discussion. And we actually cut that recap out and host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. So if you happen to find yourself on that recap video, thanks for checking us out. And if you're interested to see the full podcast, it'll be linked down below as well. But yeah, you want to take off on the first half today, my friend?
Yeah, so this is episode 47 of campaign 3. It's called The Fey Key, and that's the predominant focus from today's episode. So basically the party we pick up, they're traveling towards the Sablecast grounds. They've just encountered these centaurs. And as they basically are arriving at the Sablecast grounds and eventually the Shiver Keep, where the Malleus Key is kept, a little bit of a tongue twister. Malleus Key was kept. Yeah. They begin to notice these large pillars. Well, large is a bit of a misnomer. They're these like very thin, almost like spindly pillars that have like a white marbly stone at the top of it. And they're in a multitude of places. And these are essentially like watchtowers or warning posts for anyone coming into the Sablecast grounds. Party's not sure what it is, though, and so they send Pate to fly near one, and he is immediately affected by fairy light and is unable to continue further. There is kind of like a funny bit where Pate is sort of like giving them advice on how to avoid the fairy light and basically the awareness of these pillars by going like this way or that way. And then there was like an expression he kept using that was pretty funny, but I can't remember what it is. So all that to say, Pate then eventually gets just walloped by something. We don't see what. It is a dark, shadowy figure that is flying through the sky. So Pate is, for the time being, out of commission. The party kind of navigates their way in, avoiding what they think is the spotlight of these watchtowers, and they eventually make their way to this thick, brambly wall of vines that is protecting the Shiver Keep. The vines open up, and what Matt describes as a war band of around 15 soldiers step out, and they are looking for the party. They have seen Pate. They know there's people here. And we know because Fern speaks Sylvan that they are, not only are they looking for them, but there's one in charge who is riding this, what Matt describes as like a black stallion with a fiery mane. I think he actually calls it a nightmare later on, like the person's riding a nightmare or a night terror, something like that.
Yeah.
But they basically fan out. The party does pass without a trace, and they also consider using the veils, those beads that Maury had given them that will cause them to be invisible. They don't use them quite yet. As the brambles are shutting, there's this funny piece of conversation where FCG basically flips his Chainbringer's coin and says basically like, guide us, and then immediately is like, all right, we should go. And they're like, wait, hang on, what's going on here? And he's like, oh, well, I'm asking the Changebringer to like give us direction, and if it's heads, it means go, and if it's tails, it means don't go. And there's this funny little piece where everyone's kind of like, do we think we want to like test this theory on like something a little bit lower stakes before we just, and he's like, well, this is the whole point of faith. And we can talk about this in after the recap, but it's pretty interesting that FGG is so committed to the faith that he has with the Changebringer, as the rest of the party is kind of like, what you doing, man? All that to say, they do decide to sneak in through the brambles as they're closing. Everyone rolls well except for Ashton, who rolls a natural 1. Immediately, the earth begins to, almost like quicksand, swallow him up. Imogen touches him and casts invisibility as the warband basically looks back and begins looking for them. The earth is crawling up him, and then they remember Morgan's advice that they need to pay the the iron tithe to the earth. There was some discussion on what exactly they wanted to give to it. They talked about FCG's coin, and he was like, that's my only connection. And they eventually also said that they had like a rusty old sword that they would give. Will, I don't remember what they actually did give to the earth, but basically Ashton gets released, soaked in blood, and they're able to make their way through.
Making their way.
Yeah. Once they get inside, there is still like another perimeter with like a gate. There's guards posted everywhere, as well as what Matt describes as an Aramed, which is, I think of it as like a security dog or like a patrol dog, but
Yeah.
much more horrifying and awful. And Ladna, with an Arcana check, remembers that there's an old story of these where you can't hide from the Aramads. And so the party begins wondering maybe we can't invis and sneak past these creatures. So they're talking about how to get inside. They do see the Malleus key, which looks exactly like the one that they saw with Fern's parents and Ira. And basically, they're like, okay, we got to get in, we got to destroy it, and basically go from there. Now, there is some discussion where, and actually, I'm trying to make sure, I'm making sure that I'm not like skipping, by the way, to your section. But there is a small part where the party basically they're trying to distract guards to get away from the entrance. Chetney goes to werewolf form and basically is like, come after me, and runs away. And one of the guards is like, whatever. And the other guard's like, okay. So he chases after him. Eventually, he's kind of like, I'm bored of you, and comes back. FCG casts banishment on one of the guards, and then whenever the guard who ran away comes back, Chetney basically grapples him. Fern casts hold person, and they basically throw both guards into the portable hole, where they will eventually suffocate and die. The second guard, by the way, he drops the banishment right on top of the portable hole. All that to say, we do see two figures coming out of the Shiver Keep. One of them is Adahan Thul. One of them is what we know to be Sorrow Lord Zethuda, who we heard of all the way back from when they encountered you. And basically, they have a conversation of a creature named Saminar who's growing impatient. And Adahan's basically like, hey, do your job, and this will all be over soon. And then Adahan poofs and disappears. Sorrow Lord Zethuda jumps on the dark, flying, shadowy creature, which Matt describes as a combination of a frog and a dragon, something very horrifying and disturbing, and also names it Gloamglut. Sorrow Lord jumps on and flies away, and the party begins thinking about how to get inside to destroy the Malleus key. And that is about where we go to break. So,
yes, sir. Well done. So, after the break, we pick back up with them, seeing that this key is guarded by still a number of sentries and a pair of these Aramed like watchdogs. So, knowing, I was about to say Vox Machina, knowing Bell's Hells, they start doing a lot of planning.
Bro, I just got to say, for the sake of your recap, I didn't know which side we were going to have. And so I was like, whoever has this half is basically like, yeah, they plan for like an hour and a half. So
yep. At dawn, they plan.
Continue.
So they're planning, going back and forth. Ashton eventually opens up the portable hole, and like Blake alluded to, he sees that those two guards have suffocated. So Ashton kind of strips them of their armor, and he and Chetney decide to put on this armor and kind of pretend to be guards themselves as part of the plan. And then they kind of break up into teams. So we have Team Break the Malleus Key, which consists of Laudna, Orem, and Fern. And Fern turns into a monkey and is going to approach as stealthily as possible, like through the trees and shadows, while Orem and Laudna go invisible. So they make their way inside the courtyard's interior, and once they're there, they realize that this key is a lot bigger than they realized. It's bigger than the one that Fern's parents had created, and it's more guarded than they realized as well. So the two invisible homies make their way to the machine, and Laudna wiggles her way inside, but she realizes she would need to go even deeper to figure out anything that could actually damage this thing. Meanwhile, Fern makes her way to the machine, but she draws the attention of one of the Aramads as she does so. But she is able to make like a stealth check and kind of wiggle her way inside to avoid being detected. Laudna then goes further in the machine so she can make this Arcana check to try to figure out how to damage this thing. I think she rolls at 23, and she realizes there's two things to this. One, you could damage the mechanical parts, but those could ultimately be repaired. So you really need to damage like the Arcana aspects of this, and that would either mean you'd have to physically remove it or just overcharge and destroy like the arcane power cores. And to do that, you either have to do a whole bunch of damage real quick, or you can pump like spells into it to overcharge it. So while all this is happening, Chet and Ashton are standing, again in the fake disguises with the armor at the gate, while the rest of the party that's not at the machine is kind of hunkered down under one of those hero call veils to make them invisible, like while trying to inch closer and closer. Um, Laudna goes even deeper in the machine and gets caught in like the whirring pieces and takes 16 slashing damage. Yeah, sounded not very nice. And so then Orem squeezes his way inside and tries to, go in to help her, especially since he's smaller. He can maybe get further in. Laudna drops her invisibility in order to prestidigitation a small light to help them see better. And they ultimately decide, okay, we have some dynamite. Let's stick that in here, blow it up, and then we'll try to, overpower those power cells as well. And then between those two things, hopefully we can take this out. Laudna telepathically lets Imogen know all of that. Imogen, lets everybody else know, basically. And they're like, when you hear the explosion of the dynamite, that's basically the go sign. So Chetney and Ashton decide to start like taking the barricade off the gate to prepare for their escape ultimately. And Fern in her monkey form grabs onto Laudna, and they both start making their way out of the machine. Again, she's not invisible anymore. So a guard sees her, and Orem's like, oh, stuff's going down. We got to go. So he takes that as his cue, kind of chunks the dynamite in and makes his way out. And as he comes out, he attacks the guard that had seen Laudna, and we roll initiative at this point. As always, just kind of going to speed through this combat, just hit the high points. But with everything hitting the fan, Imogen and Laudna and FCG all start dumping spell slots into the power cores to try to take them out. And Fern actually casts a wall of fire to hit all 4 power cores at the same time. And essentially, all of their damage combined at this point makes them all crack and hum before like exploding. And everyone that's close by has to make a dexterity save. And 5 of the guards are just like completely ashed when this happens. And Fern and Laudna take a whole bunch of damage. Orem takes half because he succeeded on the save. And the Malleus key is now basically gone. And then the dynamite goes off as well, just to, make sure. But they successfully basically wiped it off the planet. So its tether effect to Ruidus fades away. And then Ruidus itself, like the image of it in the sky, also fades away.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And it's at this point that they hear like this cry from in the sky. And they're like, oh gosh, like we got to get going. And so combat's ensuing with the remaining guards and Aramads. But soon the dragon creature, the Gloam Gut, like lands on top of the keep, ridden by Zethuda. And they're like, we gotta go. So they're all attempting to run away now. And Imogen, I think, casts invisibility on herself and FCG. Zethuda yells that like no one crosses him. And then his dragon lets out this like breath weapon, essentially, that hits a few of the party, including Fern, which FCG has to transfer suffering on her so she doesn't go unconscious, which I think drops his invisibility that he had just gotten. More guards are arriving as everyone is just dashing to the gate. They all do kind of make it right toward the gate and reconvene. And the Gloam Gut has like leapt off the keep and is chasing them and attacks Fern again. And this does knock her unconscious and she kind of tumbles through the gate. But the Gloam Gut can't quite fit through the gate. So the party grabs Fern and they keep running, and the Gloam Gut like takes off to chase them in the air again. And that's basically where the episode ends.
Yeah, so that's episode 47, The Fake Key. That's what happened. And if you are watching just our recap, we're going to be chatting about the episode, so click the link. Otherwise, if you're here with us, it's the old song and dance we're used to.